Oh boy. Today's video is 10 signs you're in a toxic work culture, signs of a toxic work environment by A Life After Layoff.
So maybe you just started a new job and something just doesn't seem quite right. Those subtle signs keep popping up and it's getting harder and harder to brush them off. And you start to wonder, are you working in a toxic work environment? But don't worry, in this video, I'm going to share with you.
I've been in this position more times than I want to admit.
Common signs that you might be stuck in a toxic work environment.
That's a cool intro. I've landed my dream job, but that's a cool intro.
Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to talk to you about some common signs that you might be working in a toxic work environment. Being stuck in a toxic work environment can be one of the most physically and emotionally draining situations you can find yourself in your career.
Yes, it is, especially if you're an immigrant like I am.
Because it's going to suck the life out of you. And not only is it going to affect you, but it's also going to affect the people around you. So when you're done with work, it still follows you home. And you can find yourself up in the middle of the night dealing with anxiety-related issues, not being able to sleep well at night, and dreading going in Monday morning. And not only can it affect you mentally, but it can also affect you physically through manifestation of health issues. And a toxic work environment can also set you back years in your career. And as you know, the trade-off is not worth it. Because if you're being made to feel like a failure in a job you've otherwise been very effective in, you probably need to think about an exit strategy.
I can relate
I made a video
to this.
about signs that you should quit your job immediately. You might want to check that out if you think you're in that situation. Now, as a corporate recruiter and an
Having been in a toxic work environment myself before, it's incredibly stressful. It is the worst thing you can experience. If you can get out, you should get out. I couldn't get out because, like I mentioned, I'm an immigrant. You don't have such freedoms. So there's things you have to suffer through in order to maintain your status in the United States or wherever you may be with similar immigration issues. But anyway, let's get back to this.
HR professional with over 20 years of experience working in some of the world's largest and most well-known companies, I've talked to a lot of candidates who are dealing with that exact thing. So I want to go over some signs that the situation you're in might actually be a toxic work environment. And if that's the case, you need to start putting together your exit strategy. But before we get too far into it,
You should put together your exit strategy the moment you start a new job, even if you really, really love it and have no plans to leave. I have no plans to leave my current day job, but I'd be stupid not to have an exit strategy.
If you're looking for more videos on how to further your career directly from an HR professional and corporate recruiter, make sure you hit the subscribe and the notification buttons. All right, so let's dissect some of the signs that you might be in a toxic work environment. Sign number one is high voluntary turnover. High turnover rates are a surefire sign that something is amiss in the workplace. Now, before you jump to conclusions, every company is going to have some turnover. It's natural, and honestly, it's healthy to have some churn. But an abnormally high turnover rate in the company or specifically in the department you're considering tends to spell trouble. And
yeah, if you have voluntary turnover, things are really bad. A lot of larger companies, they have mandatory involuntary turnover every 6 to 12 months, and that's pretty anxiety producing. But if people are leaving on their own instead of that, or in addition to that, that's even worse.
And it's definitely a sign that you should pay close attention to. Now, we're talking about voluntary turnover, not the kind where somebody gets terminated or asked to leave. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, that is a completely different thing.
You see, people don't tend to leave great companies. If they're at a point in their career where they can no longer achieve upward momentum, maybe they look at a different department or the company will work with them to develop a strategy to continue to grow their career. In fact, the best companies have a much lower turnover rate than the standard 22% across the board. But
22%, Jesus Christ. That's insane.
if you notice a revolving door the minute you step foot into your new organization, you probably should pay close attention. And in fact, it's probably a question that you should be asking during the interviewing process. Why is the position open? I made a video on 10 questions you should be asking your interviewer during the interview, and you should make sure you check that out before you go on site, because we want to make sure we thoroughly vet our opportunities before we join a new organization.
Question you should ask, what's the turnover rate?
So it's important to pay close attention to why people are leaving. Go to Glassdoor and look at their recent reviews. See if there's a common thread. Keep your ears peeled, and as you ask around the departments that you might be exposed to, you might glean some information that will help give you some insight as to why people are turning over. All right.
Yeah, that's true. If you're going to an in-person interview, look at the people around you, see if everyone is tired, miserable, and if so, at the very least ask questions, if not be just suspicious in general, because generally if you're walking into a happy company where people love being there, you're not going to see a lot of miserable people. One or two burnt out folks is fine. Of course, people have their burnouts, people get tired, that's fine. But if you see like half the people or 3/4 of the people being miserable or stressed out or too busy or short of breath running around or short of breath at their desk, big red flag.
All right, so the second sign is excessive involuntary turnover. Now, this is the kind of turnover that the company separates the employee.
Yes.
That's a nice way of saying they either terminated, fired, or let go of you.
Yeah, also known as we're chopping off the bottom so and so many percent of the company to get rid of the people who shouldn't be there.
If you move into
To quote Zuckerbot.
to a new organization that has a reputation for terminating people for small infractions or for not hitting very difficult to fill metrics, that's going to be a huge red flag. And these type of companies tend to have knee-jerk reactions to market conditions. These companies typically think that they can call those same employees back at a moment's notice once market conditions turn more favorable for them. What this shows is an inept management team, or at worst, one that just doesn't care much about you. Either way, it's not the type of organization that you want to align yourself to. You want to find companies that actually value you.
The type of management that this gentleman is complaining about, those people are very, very short-sighted, and they shouldn't be in the positions they are, because it's A, not good for the long-term prospect of the company, and B, it's abusive to people they're firing for no good long-term reason.
The same goes for
keyword long-term
bosses that will fire you on a whim. Maybe the employee hasn't met unreasonable standards or expectations and the boss flies off the handlebars. Either way, it's an unstable work environment and it's definitely considered toxic. All right, so let's take that one a step further. The ever-changing targets. Moving targets are another sure sign of a toxic work environment, because you never truly know what your goals are. And if that target keeps on moving, you're never going to hit it. And it makes for frustrating employment experiences because nobody seems to be on the same page. And if nobody's on the same page, they're going to be inevitably working against each other to get their goals accomplished. So
this is a really important thing for whoever ends up watching this video. If you have a moving target, make sure you have a paper trail that you can point to when your manager inevitably complains that you haven't hit the moving target, which was completely different when you started working on whatever project it is.
So if there's a winner and a loser in your own department or your own company, then that's definitely not a situation that you can ever truly be successful in. And even when you think you might be reaching that elusive goal, the little carrot that's being dangled in front of you keeps on moving just out of reach to keep you working harder and harder on that hamster wheel. But the only place they should be running is right out the door and into a better opportunity.
You make sure you get that carrot.
Because having your compensation tied to that level of insecurity is no way to exist in your career. Now let's talk about the next one, poor reviews. Reviews are generally a pretty good gauge of the type of work culture you may find yourself walking into. And if you're a current employee, make sure you jump over to Glassdoor and or Indeed and start looking for the reviews of the company just to see what your fellow coworkers are thinking. You might find yourself nodding in agreement or shaking your head in disgust. Now, larger companies are going to have more reliable data sets than smaller companies, but you want to look for common threads. Now, keep in mind, people tend to review when they're not very happy with the situation, so you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But see what people are saying about the leadership team. Are they living to the core values? Are they setting realistic expectations for their fellow employees?
It's easier to judge whether reviews are legitimate as you progress along your career and you have a more realistic view of what leadership should be like. If you're fresh out of college, you might have an expectation that every task that you're given should come with detailed instructions. And that is true to a certain small, reasonable extent. But as you progress to more senior roles, you're expected to sort of know roughly what to do given a general picture of what's going on. And as you progress in your career, you also have a better picture of what leadership is going through and what to expect from them from a more top-down perspective, or even from a not at the bottom perspective. So all in all, reviews are more deceiving when you're at the beginning and you have no context, and they can provide a lot more valuable insight when you're no longer the junior whatever or the middle whatever. That being said, when you hit a certain point in your career, you shouldn't lose perspective of what junior people or new people or people coming in with experience from the outside have to say about the way the company is being run.
Are the benefits competitive? Is the compensation competitive? Do they treat people with respect, or are they laying them off at a moment's notice?
You should always strive to achieve at least market rate for what you're worth. And if you're trying to be a next level employee, make sure you get compensated as such, and don't settle for the standard 2 or 3%, which of course, now that inflation is much higher than that, don't even settle for just inflation, especially if you're busting your balls to get the job done.
What's the work-life balance like? So there's
Work-life balance, work from home.
a lot of things that you can tell from reviews, and that's why good companies spend time focusing on exit reviews so they can look for data and trends. Now, again, we're looking for overarching themes because particularly unscrupulous companies have been known to pad their stats by sending in employees and incentivizing them to make false reviews.
There have been quite a handful of companies that mandate writing a review within your first so and so many days of joining the company, with the intent of farming positive reviews. And of course, new employees always have a more positive picture of the company that they just joined than people who've been around for a while.
So if you see a bunch of reviews clumped together that seem suspicious on a company, you might want to use a grain of salt when considering those reviews.
Yes, consider how long they've been at the company or how long they were around at the company. And if possible, and this only counts for people who have at least a modicum of connections in whatever field, try and figure out who those people are and why they left or why they got left.
But that in and of itself is a sign of a toxic workplace inside of the reviews, so pay attention to that too. All right, so let's talk about...
Just to finish the point, sometimes the people who write reviews are the ones who were the toxic environment themselves. Obviously not always, just sometimes. Maybe 5 or 10% at least.
The next one. It's a win at all cost mentality. Now, this mentality usually starts at the most senior levels of the organization, and it's certainly a toxic way to run your business. The win at all cost mentality typically starts at the most senior levels of the organization, and it rarely bodes well for a good work environment. Listen, there's nothing wrong with being competitive in the workplace, but you have to do it in the correct way. If you're working for a company that's cutting corners, doing shady and or illegal things, and treating their employees poorly just to get the final buck, you really need to think about your situation. Because these types of organizations tend to value the almighty dollar over everything else, and where do you think that leaves you in the hierarchy? So if your employer's goals come at the expense of doing the right thing, beware. Now,
in my experience, the employer's goals not being aligned with doing the right thing is also not in the interest of the company itself. When people do the wrong thing, the employees notice. And when the employees notice, the employees leave. The employees leave means the good employees leave. And the good employees leaving means the company that's left after the good employees are gone results in a shittier company. And it turns into a death spiral of shittiness and short-term thinking and decisions that really shouldn't be and can all be avoided if the shortcuts are not given into.
Now, the next major sign of a toxic work environment is the work-life balance, or specifically the lack thereof. Companies, and in particular bosses, who pride themselves on excessive amounts of hours to get a job done
Elon Musk.
are toxic, because most jobs should be performed satisfactorily in 40 hours. And if you're routinely having to work
I agree.
60 plus hours a week to get a job done, then your company's either understaffed or they're overworking you, or a combination of both. Now, there are some companies that pride themselves in the idea of working excessive hours as part of a normal culture. So if you find yourself working in one of those industries, it's something to think about. And if your boss is somebody that values face time over actual productive work, then it's also a sign of a toxic boss.
Absolutely true. And let's recap the work hours part first. If you are working more than 40 hours, you should only be doing so if you are either intellectually invested in whatever it is you're doing, or if you're getting paid either in overtime or a grand salary that comes with the expectations of extra effort, or if you really need this job and the company is going to die and sink if you do not fix this emergency thing that will literally tank the business if you do not do it immediately instead of, a few hours later in the morning after a long night's sleep, where you can think more clearly, get a fresh cup of coffee, and have a more productive day within your 40 hours that you should be confined to working within, and still doing a great job.
Because a good boss isn't going to be calling you on nights and weekends and while you're on your vacation, asking you for status updates on things that can wait till Monday. So if you find yourself routinely having to work excessive hours as part of a normal work culture, then you're probably in a toxic environment. Now, it's not to say that you won't have to work occasionally long hours in order to get a job done or to finish a project on time. But
that's true. As a software engineer, you should expect a little bit of crunch time, but you should expect a little bit higher than the national median salary.
You shouldn't have to be doing that on a regular basis. And more people are demanding a work-life balance as part of a consideration for taking a new job.
This is why remote work is the greatest thing to happen since the pandemic. Work-life balance, so much better when you don't have to spend 1 or 2 hours in your car every day doing nothing.
And that's something that you should be picky about, because you can't get those hours back or the memories lost of not making it to your kid's baseball game because you work too much.
Yep.
So if you find yourself in a situation where you're routinely expected to work 60 plus hours a week, you really need to think about if that's the right fit for you.
I've been there.
The next major sign of a toxic work culture is dishonesty. Now, this one's probably the most obvious one on the list. If you work for a company that does not live by their core values, then you're certainly in a toxic work environment.
I tell every new person on my team, speak up, feel free to criticize everything we do, question the process, ask questions, comment on everything. May the best ideas win. Dishonesty only promotes, toxic work environments, and it also ends up hurting the product or service in the long run, and therefore the company and everyone who's working for the company.
Dishonesty can come in a lot of different formats, from leaders who don't practice what they preach, but it can also come in the form of dishonest
That's
coworkers.
really bad.
Coworkers who fabricate situations to suit themselves are toxic people to be around.
Absolutely.
And if you find yourself in those types of environments, you're not going to last very long, nor should you want to last very long. Because if you're somebody who prides yourself in doing the right thing and you're surrounded by people who don't, that's never a winning formula.
Surround yourself with people who are the real deal. Stay honest. Welcome criticism. Even if they outrank you, everything's going to be fine. Don't associate yourself with the the cockroaches who are dishonest and try to bullshit their way through the corporate world.
Because these types of coworkers are willing to throw you under the bus to save their own tail, even if it's not the truth.
Yep.
And
Seen it
things like this
happen.
can derail a career in an instant. So beware if you are surrounded by dishonest people. The next major sign of a toxic work culture is coworkers who go behind your back directly to your boss. Inevitably, you're going to be faced with conflict at some point in your career with a coworker or somebody else that you support. And in most circumstances, issues can be resolved through open lines of communication. But the coworker who feels that it's okay to go around you and directly to your boss for every little issue is a sign of a toxic work environment.
Yeah, so my capture card shat itself just now. Let's finish the rest of the video.
Directly to your boss for every little issue is a sign of a toxic work environment. Because you're never going to build up that necessary layer of trust. Because in the back of your mind, you're always going to be wondering who's spying on you and who's tattling. And besides, if somebody has an issue with your work, they should give you a chance to address it directly. But
if you have to go to work and live in constant fear of having to do politics instead of your job, you're not going to be very effective overall to begin with. So it really is a huge problem.
If you have a coworker that continually goes behind your back to your boss, that type of situation can't be tolerated. The next major sign of a toxic work environment is gossip or excessive gossip. Now, gossip has always been a thing as long as there's been a water cooler in the building. But there is such a thing as excessive or toxic gossip. Now, think about your own work situation. I guarantee you can identify who the major gossips are in that organization. And if you can't identify who the gossips are in the organization, chances are it might actually be you. And now, I kid sort of. But if you align yourself with the gossips in your organization, it's a surefire sign to a very short career. So if you value your upward mobility at the company you're in, make sure you stay clear of those gossip cliques.
Caveat, there is a difference between gossip and intelligence gathering in the sense that gossipy people will concern themselves with day-to-day stuff that isn't really important and doesn't pertain to the big picture of the actual work, whereas intelligence gathering among close coworkers is more revolved around figuring out who is making good or bad decisions that's going to actually impact the project, the work, or even the company as a whole.
Because inevitably, if you get labeled as a gossiper, it's going to be really hard to get rid of that stigma, and people are going to associate you with that. And that's not something you want to be known for. Not to mention,
That's true. Don't be the person who's like, oh, so-and-so is comes to work and doesn't clean out their coffee mug. That's gossip.
I can tell you how many HR issues I had to resolve based on gossip being the root cause. So do yourself a favor, stay out of the water cooler talk, and get back to work. The last major sign that I want to share that you are in a toxic work environment is bad bosses. Now, I made a video specifically on 10 types of bad bosses that you might be working for at some point in your career. So if you haven't watched that video, go and check it out for more details. But if you find yourself working for a bad boss, that's going to be one of the quickest ways to be looking for a new job. Because in most cases, people quit bosses, not jobs.
That's true. That is absolutely true.
Because we all know a great boss makes a world of difference in the type of work culture you're in, and a bad boss can negatively impact it the fastest. So if you find yourself dealing with any one of those 10 bad boss types that I covered in that video, you probably want to think about updating your resume. Alright, so there's a lot of signs that I just presented about signs that you're in a toxic work environment. If you find yourself in one of these situations, you really have to reflect on, is it a systematic issue or is it localized to one person or one boss? And if it's the latter, maybe you can make a move to a different department. But if it's a company-wide issue that you can't easily resolve, then you have to think about what's best for your career, because at the end of the day, we're all free agents and we all need to look out for ourselves first.
It's easier to find a new job than to try and Game of Thrones your boss out of the way, for sure.
But if you need more help in the job hunting process, that's actually something that I specialize in. I've got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com. It's loaded with tips and tricks, all from an insider's perspective. Suggest you go and check it out. I've also got a couple of training courses
He's ready to help you find a new job if you have a toxic boss.
is that I share my most deep and intimate knowledge of the recruitment process. One is called Resume Rocket Fuel. It is designed to teach you exactly how to write a resume, all from a recruiter's perspective, that gives you the best chance of getting noticed. And once you land that first interview, be sure to check out the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp, which gets you all the way to the finish line.
It's a
In
very
that course, we
good
cover
segue
each step
to
of the interviewing
self-promo.
process and ultimately how to
Respect
land
that.
the offer. Make sure you check it out. Hey, if you're in a toxic work environment, hang in there, but take proactive steps and make sure you're moving the ball forward in your career.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you watching, and we will see you on the next one.
That was an insightful video. I can relate to more points than I would like to admit. I'm very happily employed. But you might not be. And if you're not, do something about it. Whether it is using this gentleman's services or whether it is to update your LinkedIn profile and go job hunting yourself, or if you have enough sway or clout in your workplace, see if you can fix that first. People do respect the ability to coordinate people's will to improve a work environment. Whether or not you stay at the company is irrelevant. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you liked it, please do consider subscribing, hitting the bell icon. If you didn't like this video, of course, leave me a comment. I want to know what I did wrong. No opinions are perfect. I try to improve mine all the time. Let's see where this goes. And with that said, I'm out. Bye.